We're back.
We're back.
Back in action on a Monday to talk about Law 23 of the 48 Laws of Power, which is by Robert Greene,
Uh-huh.
which is to concentrate your forces. Conserve your forces and energies by keeping them concentrated at their strongest point. You, c- you, you gain more by finding a rich mine and mining it deeper than by flitting from one shallow mine to another. Intensity defeats extensity every time. When looking for sources of power to elevate you, find that one key patron, the fat cow who will give you milk for a long time to come. So, Law 23 is concentrate your forces. So,
I love it.
yeah, this law in particular, I've seen play out in business settings when people spread themselves too thin. And we were talking about it earlier today, but one thing in particular that I remember seeing when I was in the financial services was this one gentleman who he had one person who would send him all this business, but he would never say no to that person. And that person began to send this salesman further and further away, to the point that the quality of the work, because he was a one-man show, began to decrease and decrease and decrease. And I always thought about this law because I was reading the book back then, and this is several years ago, and I remember thinking, this person's spreading themselves too thin, quality's dropping, and
Sure.
that allows somebody else to get in there. And if you're looking at it from a war standpoint, they're weaker at that point, and you can attack.
That's right.
And I did.
Wow.
And I did. And I remember taking opportunities that were there because this person didn't concentrate their forces. They were saying yes to everything, and they began to have gaps in their
Wow.
in their army. You could
Interesting. So you lived it.
say. I saw it take place, and so I look at it and I say, okay, how can you protect yourself?
And you benefited from it.
I personally benefited from it. Yeah. So I
Wow.
strongly believe in this law. They say that, we'd say it all the time, the jack of all trades, the master of none. If you try to do everything, if you spread yourself to a point. But so I am with Robert Greene on this one. There's some laws that I say, I'm not sure about. But what do you think? What do you think about this one?
No, I do. I think so. I think it's right on the money. In fact, if you go back to history, there are a lot of famous people that have lost their wars because of spreading themselves too thin. The books talks about Athens being one of them. They wanted the island of Sicily so badly, and it was somewhat remote to them, and they did so much to try to obtain it, they ended up losing their empire. And so, and you can go on and on and on. A lot of people argue that, Hitler, he was fighting on two fronts, and that's what, destroyed him. Had he concentrated on one thing at a time, we'd be speaking German here today in the United States of America.
I heard that before.
Oh, yeah.
What
No doubt about it.
what countries was he attacking?
Well, he went to fight Russia, and he anticipated. So this is what I think from what I've read. So you guys do your own research.
There were two borders, right?
Yeah, well, he went to fight Russia, and he anticipated to win the war against the Russians earlier. So, but he didn't. It took him longer, and then the winter set in. And the winter is brutal. And Stalin had these elite forces that were able to fight in super cold weather, and they were used to it. And they just annihilated the Germans. You can see it if you do a diagram, and people that study history have done it. They went in. They almost got to Moscow, to the capital. They almost, the Germans.
Wow.
And so you see it, and you see the progression in the battlefield of the German flag which is supposed to represent their forces, because he was also fighting at the other end with England. He wanted to take over England, and you had Churchill and all this kind of stuff, and then so
the idea is, had he
concentrated on one front,
mm,
of course, hindsight is 2020, but England was just about.
man,
I mean, huh?
siren is loud.
That siren is loud, yes. But England was at the end of this rope. I mean, sure, Churchill was a motivator and a statesman and super smart and brilliant and a hell of a tremendous artisan of war and tactician, okay? But he was at the end of his rope. Even with all the motivation and he had these paraphrase and one-liners that were tremendous. They would motivate people, right? But England was devastated. All you have to do is look at pictures after the war. So, if Hitler had concentrated over on the Western Front, England would have fallen. I believe. This is my belief. I have no doubt. England would have fallen.
And just a fun fact, because I remember I went to Paris. He got to Paris.
Oh, yeah.
And he insulted the French by, I remember hearing the story, he drove his, I think the tanks under the Arc of Triumph.
Wow.
El Arco de Triunfo. So that was like the greatest insult, you're the Germans coming in and
can you imagine
going underneath. That was just a fun fact. But yeah, he was had he concentrated his forces.
Oh.
In history,
we'll be speaking German in the US of A.
Yeah, you
potentially.
Robert Greene talks about you let ambition blind you.
Right.
Because we think it's good to be ambitious,
Yes.
But we were talking about the story that he lists as an example, right? This was a Chinese empire.
Oh, yeah.
And
the kingdom of Wu.
And the emperor was blind by ambition.
Correct.
And he didn't take the warnings.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah, he was trying to take over the Middle Kingdom, which had more established and more history, and it would have made him look really, really good because the kingdom of Wu was up and coming, but they were powerful. But his consigliere told him, don't do it, because they were beginning to see weaknesses. And then there was another kingdom, I believe, to the east of them that was beginning to notice, hey, they're losing. They started off with winning battles left and right. This is the kingdom of Wu, okay? Yeah. And they wanted to take over the Middle Kingdom, which would have given him tremendous enterprisal and historical and all this stuff. He was he was ambitious beyond, but his consigliere told him, don't do it.
Right.
And in the process, the consigliere saw, hey, this guy's ambition it's going to be his downfall. So he sent his own son to safety to another kingdom of Qi, I believe. This is the consigliere sending his son. And then he went back to the king and said, look, this is what's going to happen. Please don't do it. And the king took his advice as if he was a traitor.
Right.
And he said, I want you to kill yourself for being a traitor to the king.
Right.
And his name was Wu Shu. And he said, okay. And before he stabbed himself to death, he said, my king, after I'm done, carve my eyes out of my body and put him on top of the gate of the Wu kingdom. Because I know, and the kingdom that was going to take over was the Yue. He says, I know that Yue is going to come back. And so the king didn't make any reference to that. He committed, the suicide. And sure enough, I think it was 5 years later, the king was being overrun by the kingdom of Yue. And he remembered what his consigliere had told him.
Right.
Carve my eyes out and put him on,
Yeah.
at the door of our kingdom, at the gate of our kingdom, so I can see them come in like I told you to.
Right.
And you know what the king did? He committed suicide so that he would not have the peering eyes of his consigliere constantly on him in the afterlife.
Well,
It's tremendous. The story's tremendous.
I think you missed a piece. I think he covered his eyes
he
before
did.
committing suicide.
Oh,
He
okay.
covers his face so that
okay.
he wouldn't have to stare at the guy that told him, "Hey, you should have listened."
Oh,
It was
man.
something along those lines. But I mean, it's
Well, the part
interesting.
that I read was that, he killed himself so that the peering eyes. Yeah,
Yeah,
read it. It's just tremendous.
it's a cool story.
Oh, it sure is.
Because it
Loyalty at its max.
Yeah,
I mean, the guy tells you kill yourself and you do it.
So
I mean-
how do you know when you are spreading yourself too thin? How do you know when that point is? Because we're people that we're always talking about looking for new opportunities and being ambitious as a good thing. But then when is it that it's gone too far? How do you gauge that?
For me, it's really easy. Now, some people say it's extremely difficult. For me, it's very easy. When you see that you're making small mistakes, little mistakes, it's
That's where it begins.
that's where it begins.
That's powerful.
You see that you're making little mistakes, not big mistakes. You're making a big mistake, you're already done. It begins when you're seeing the little mistakes. What are little mistakes? You make a mistake in
You overlook something. You missed an appointment. You're late to something.
you schedule an appointment at the wrong time.
Right.
Okay? How did you miss that?
Right.
And why did you miss that? Where was your mind when you were doing that? Was it somewhere else? Because when you're being pulled at the same time in 20 different directions,
Right.
you're not doing an efficient job.
Because one thing is being organized. And if you have a calendar that you live by and you're very organized, you can still be effective, tactical, like a Navy SEAL, boom, boom, boom. But if you're to a point where you're too thin, and things, I was thinking about it because, people that, like Elon Musk says that he used to sleep in his in the floor of the warehouse.
The conference room. He would go to the conference room. There was a couch, and the couch was just up, so he'd sleep on the floor.
You hear
of his warehouse,
Steve Jobs
did the same thing.
I don't know if Bill Gates.
Probably.
So you hear about these things, but then if you're lack of sleep and rest, you're not thinking straight sometimes. So I don't know how some of these guys did it, because they're to the point of exhaustion, and I don't think you're at your best when you're at exhaustion. I remember they used to say, if you're going to take a test, do it first thing in the morning after having breakfast, a good cereal. That's when your mind is the sharpest. At least that's what they used to tell us in school. So how do you know, it's good to burn the midnight oil and all those sayings, but then maybe you're spreading yourself too thin. You're taking more than you can really handle.
You bring so many ideas to mind, Mike, because, for example, in the medical field, the medical doctors, the residents, the 1-year residents, they go through brutal. That sometimes they have to be up like 48 hours, and continue to be at their best, and it's brutal. For the first year, second year residents, they have to have this stamina, and you're dealing with the public and serious matters of health and maybe even at some point life, and that yet they have to do it, And
that's a big issue, right?
It is.
Nurses being overworked, doctors being overworked.
And you do 2 shifts, one after the other.
Right, because
firemen, they do it too, and that is a extremely physical a job. You're fighting a fire. Sometimes you see them fighting a fire for 16 hours straight, and then you see them exhausted, lying. I don't know if you've seen pictures of firemen after they fight a fire.
Yeah.
Oh my God, I have. They are no. They're full of soot and they're lying down. They probably just ate something. They're totally exhausted because that's very physical too.
Right.
Now, the first year resident also.
Sure.
Okay, that's also very physical.
Yeah.
But firemen, because look, there are no 8-hour schedules when you're fighting a fire. Okay? The fire keeps burning. But you have to bring these people out to give them a rest so that they can be efficient. But they could potentially be there 15 hours fighting a fire.
Yeah.
Depending on how big the fire is, how fast it's spreading, and so forth and so on. You see what I'm saying? So I've seen pictures of them exhausted. So there's no way to give credence.
Have you ever?
When I see a fireman, we should pay for their lunch, their breakfast, their dinners, be grateful that they're there for all of us.
Absolutely.
But we're getting away from the law.
Have you ever seen a situation where you thought it would be great to take that opportunity, but you wouldn't be concentrating your forces at that point, and you would become weaker by taking on that opportunity, and so you turn it down? Have you ever come across something like that?
I've turned opportunities down because I felt that it would take so much out of me that then at that point my health would be affected.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have to wait.
I also remember you saying that it would take you away from family.
Also.
And that was a reason why sometimes you would say, hey, you know what? I'm going to pass on that one.
Yeah. Cardone has the opposite opinion of mine. And Cardone is a billionaire, and he seems to have his family life together and his act together. He went through a lot. I have a great deal of respect for him, even though he's very abrasive, because he pulled himself out of, he was an addiction, a drug addict, So I have a great deal of respect for what he says. And he says, just go for it. And along the way, you're going to figure it out. If you see something that you think is a good opportunity, take it. Take it, and along the way, you're going to figure out which. And there's a lot to be said about that. But concentrating your forces, like the law says, makes you strong.
Yeah.
And dissipating them makes you weak.
Yeah.
It's just as simple as that. And
in a business setting or profession setting, to be a specialist means you've concentrated your focus, your energy, your knowledge on one particular part of a trade or one particular trade. You're the specialist, and those are usually the highest compensated people because they're the best at it.
Yeah.
If you have an issue, let's say a health issue, whether it's with the heart or a different part of the body, you want the specialist who has trained and concentrated their energy and years of training and on that one specific thing. And so I think that many times we want to learn a little bit of everything or try to do everything. Like in the insurance industry, the ones, you try to do everything because potentially you can make a little money doing every little piece of business. But then the reality is that you're not that great at anything.
Yeah, you need
sometimes.
Yeah, that used to be an old thing. Like, for example, 40 years ago, you went to a general practitioner in medicine, and he would be able to treat so many things because he had a wide aspect idea of many, many illnesses and so forth and so on. And so you went to a general practitioner and, and seldom, or not seldom, but you were sent to a specialist when you really needed it. And then you saw the progress of medicine and everybody specializing, in one particular field. So the general practitioner became like a referral basis because he could do very little, like colds and injection here or there. But if anything else were, like, for example, the heart, send them to a cardiologist. The kidneys, send them to a nephrologist. The stomach, send them to a gastroenterologist. The brain, send them to a neurologist. The information was so much that not one person could potentially hold it all. You know, I mean, if you were an Einstein or something like that, but you had to refer it out,
Yeah.
to make sure that that patient got the best treatment possible.
Yeah.
And I do a lot of reviews, you know, before we sat down.
Yeah.
And there was one guy that put it super cool, you know, on the concentration of your power.
Mm-hmm.
He said, you cannot hit 2 targets with 1 arrow. Just listen to that sentence. Isn't that cool? I mean, that kind of, you cannot hit 2 targets with 1 arrow.
Yeah.
And, you know, if you try, especially if one target's here and the other one it's here, you know, how do you do it? You're going to have to dissipate your forces. And by doing that, you become weaker in the center, right? Mm-hmm. One goes here, center's weak. Boom, somebody comes and attacks the center, you know? That's the whole theory behind lying or deceiving in war. Remember one time we talked about in World War II, they had all these inflatable tanks.
Who did? Who had them?
The Allies. The Allies showed inflatable tanks, and they were made out of air. But the Germans took pictures, you know, from the air, and they said, "Oh my God, they have a tremendous battalion." You know, you guys can look it up.
Yeah, no, yeah.
During World War II, the Allies, to fool the Germans, put together an inflatable.
A fleet of tanks.
A fleet of tanks and this and that, so that they could take pictures, you know, from high above. They couldn't tell if they were real or not with the technology that they had back then.
Okay, so one counter argument would be to test this law, because he's saying when you're looking for sources of power to elevate you, find one key patron, the fat cow, who will give you milk for a long time. But don't they say it's not good to have all your eggs in one basket? And, you know, don't they say that, you know, if you rely too much on one person, that can come back and bite you? What this law is saying is that the slave in this case becomes the master. So
wow,
that's
amazing.
They become the master because the person that was hiring you, and he used several examples in the book, that I think the Medicis would use one famous artist, and the King Henry would use another famous artist, and they became the only artist that they would do work for. I'm sorry,
that artist would do work for them.
Yes, and so the master became dependent on
I think
that artist.
The Medici, Galileo used the Medici.
Yeah, so they became dependent on Galileo. But at first, Galileo was the slave to the master.
Right.
But then now the master, who needed a work commission, became at the mercy of Galileo.
Because you develop a relationship and you're reliable and you're only attending to their needs. So then, unbeknownst to them, they become dependent. Right, yeah.
So those are really cool examples.
Oh, my goodness, Mike. Yeah.
Yeah, because they can kind of argue against. But I do think you have to be careful if you're relying only on one source or one person. You do have to be careful because there could be that situation like I was sharing at the beginning where you're afraid to say no to a certain work and it ends up, you know, not being good for you in the long run.
Right. Yeah. I mean, if you're going to, for example, in war, every time that a successful expansion was done, you had a general that you could rely on that was able to oversee that expansion.
Like a manager.
And run it. Like in today's business, you would have to have someone like a manager
Your right hand.
your
Somebody.
right hand person, and to oversee that. Like, for example, expansion, don't, we're not against expansion, but if we adhere to the law says concentrating your forces is where you're going to have the highest form of power,
Right.
and with that power,
That's where they're strongest.
that and you're going to expand. For
Right.
example, look at the Rothschild family. So if you go back to I think it was the late 1800s, Meyer Rothschild was the first guy, and he had 5 sons. Okay, and you guys can look up the history. I didn't read this right now, but he had 5 sons, and one of the sons, I think James went to Paris. Another son went to London. One son stayed in Frankfurt, Germany. Another son went to Vienna, and the other son went to. So I'm sure of these: Vienna, Paris, London, Frankfurt, and another son went to another location. Okay? So he had 5 sons. So they were brothers. They trusted each other, and they developed this communication that was, I think, German Yiddish or something like that. So they couldn't break it. There were a lot of people that could not break that communication so that they could find out what they were doing. And from there, they controlled the banking system, the financial system in practically all of Europe. But the way they spread out was this way, where they each were controlling the areas that they were in. So he was able to expand. And by the way, something interesting.
Very strategic.
When he died, he did not name one of his sons as heirs at all. He didn't name any one in particular. So they were kind of like, in the old days, if you didn't name an heir, all the brothers fought each other and killed each other. You can see it over and over again over history. But in this case, the Rothschilds, the main guy, I forget his last, he didn't name an heir, so they had to get along with each other, and they decided, we're going to go this way, this way, this way, this, or the father guided them before dying, and they control all the financial in Europe.
Wow.
They were tremendous.
Wow.
Tremendous.
So he was able to expand, but he was strategic by
with his
sending
sons.
special people for the task.
Well, his sons.
His sons.
Period. Nobody else. Family members and not. Another thing that's interesting in this particular case is, and you guys do your own reading, but they married their first cousins. So when it was time to marry, James married, I forget, there was James and Carl and Nathan and whatever. So he married Nathan's daughter, and, you know what I'm saying? So there's on record 18 marriages of the offsprings of these guys, and 16 of those marriages were done to the first cousins to keep the control of the financial services that they had developed throughout the world within their family.
Wow.
You guys double check me to see if I'm wrong, okay? 18 of them, 16 of those were planned with first cousins. So the moral of the story that you could derive from that historical fact is that if you're going to expand, you need a right-hand man or a right-hand woman that you trust like a manager, okay? And it brings me back to Mark Cuban. Mark Cuban says that a lot. Mark Cuban owns 100 companies, okay? And he supervises every company when he buys it. He micromanages until the point that, boom, a star is born. And he says, okay, I'll pay you well. You're never going to have a problem. But I need your undivided loyalty to run this endeavor. And that's what Mark Cuban does. And I think he's been very successful following that. And that way you don't have to marry your first cousins. Because there's some genetic stuff that goes on,
Wow. Yeah. I mean,
interesting, isn't it?
It's very.
Oh, my God.
It's very interesting. And you see it play out in real life, in history.
Oh God.
Um, very, very
That
interesting.
that's why I love doing these podcasts. Okay, because
Yeah.
it's forcing you and me to read about all this thing, and we've been at this for a little while now. It's gonna be a year when
In December.
in December will be a year, and you said we got a little sick in the beginning and so forth, and
Yeah.
so it's it's actually more like
Yeah.
March of next year, right, or something. But anyway, it forces us to read and
Definitely.
look back at history and all the things that we're talking about, so that we can bring value, and it's making us different peoples in this
Yeah,
process. I
absolutely.
mean, I love it if you have the time.
It's making us better. You know, when the word concentrate your the phrase concentrate your forces, it sounds like war, right? And so some people also would say, you know, this is more for like war, but I think it applies to business a lot.
Oh,
I think you can take any of the laws. You can even take Sun Tzu's book, right? A lot of those books
yeah,
are
the art of war.
the art of war, and apply these things to, because business is war.
Business is war. If you're going to buy a business, and we're actually thinking of buying a business right now, you know, it's not going to happen anytime soon, but we're thinking about it. Is it the right time to expand? Do we have the people that can service all these folks? Are we going to
Yeah.
make that move? And what are the seller's requests? The seller wants this, and that. Does that jive with our vision of moving forward and expanding? You know?
And yeah.
Is
and
it worth it? Is it this? Is it that? So absolutely, this
It's
law
war.
this law is beautiful, and it applies to today, hands
Yes.
down.
And I would love to know of like an instance where somebody, because like one of our previous laws was uh, knowing when to surrender, which to a certain goes kind of hand in hand too, because what if you've expanded too much and maybe you need to retreat? Use the surrender tactic, right? What if you've actually expanded too much and you need to come back, surrender a little bit, take a loss, get stronger, and then concentrate again? And
You know, it's just that, and Patrick says it all the time, and I think Patrick says it, and Jordan Peterson. You know, they say, look at the data, and then do the most important thing in your life. Take yourself out of the equation. Get your ego out of the way. You know?
Yeah.
Think logistically. Because you've got your ego in there. Your ego's hurt. And the last thing you want to do is surrender, right? You want to fight.
Right.
You want to go down in flames, right? You want to go down in fighting. But why not live to see another day to fight? You know?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
It reminds me, and right now the names escape me, but it was this one guy with the Russian Tsar that he was ordered to be hung. Okay? And I forget the name right now, but you guys can look it up. The guy was ordered to be hung, and then the morning of the hanging came, and they hung the guy, but the rope broke, and he fell to the ground alive, and he was still alive. And so that was something, because in order to
hang, right? It was like a sign.
Yeah, so in order to hang somebody, you needed the permission of the Tsar. So they hung him, but the rope broke, and he was alive, and he was doing well. And so they came to the Tsar, and they said, hey, look, he's alive. He didn't hang. That's a sign, maybe, that he should live. Okay, no problem. And the Tsar said, okay, I'll sign his pardon. But then he turned to his general and said, did he say something? Did he say something after this, or, like thanking God or something like that? And the general said, yes, my Tsar. He said that in Russia, they're so weak in every field that they can't even make a rope correctly to hang someone. And that infuriated the Tsar so much that instead of signing his pardon, he signed a new execution order for the following day. And they made sure that they got a good rope. And the guy died the following day.
What a story.
Okay? So, what an idiot he was. What an idiot. You know, he was saved by the grace of God, right? Let's just say that. And then he turns around and sticks a knife in the Tsar's ego. I mean, you can't write it, because he said in Russia you can't even make ropes correctly.
Jesus.
Instead, he would have gone down in history as the man who defeated the Tsar and death, and maybe done something really, really fruitful with his life. Has he been able to keep his mouth shut? You know? But he didn't. He just blurted this thing out. It's also a good law to say that we have a law, I think is law number 3. No, 3 is conceal your intentions. I think law number 4 is say less than necessary. Okay? Because 5 is your reputation. So law 4, I think, is say less than necessary. Keep your mouth shut. You know?
Oh.
Anyway, and so you remind me of that when you bring, but it's definitely, this is a law that...
Yep, law 4, you're right. Always say less than necessary.
Yeah, he was an idiot. But, you know, he went down in history. You know, now you hear that story and you say, what an idiot. Or at least I do.
But,
but
you didn't know. You know,
I mean,
it was no way.
But this, concentrate your forces, no doubt about it.
Yeah.
You can look it up, the Rothschild family.
Yeah.
Okay? The guy had 5 sons, they spread out. And that's the way you acquire and conquer, right?
Yes.
Genghis Khan did that too. So this is a law that can be applied in business today, no doubt about it.
I think it's a good one.
No doubt about
it. It's a really good one.
And Patrick talks about it, because Patrick says, look, are you willing to make this sacrifice of this expansion? Okay, you said that you are, and mentally you're ready, but are you ready physically? And not mean that you're strong, but do you have the right outputs? You know, do you
enough people, somebody to
locations? Do you have the right locations? Do you have the right people?
Like one thing that I know at hotels, when they expand and they open a new one, they bring in like a specific team to get the hotel running. And then once it's running, I don't know how long that takes, you know, at a high level, they begin to move these other guys. But to get it off the ground, you have to have the resources, the people to send in there.
Well, you know who you bring to mind? In-N-Out. In-N-Out just expand. I was reading an article. They expanded outside of California. I forget if it's Idaho or anyway.
Yeah, they're in Idaho now.
Okay, so what In-N-Out does, and look at this, is a company that's growing. They're expanding.
It's a privately held company.
Right. So they're not afraid of expanding. You know what they do? I forget what state it was. I'm not sure if it's Idaho or what, but they took a seasoned working force from California and flew them to whatever state they were, and they're physically and they're training everybody the processes for In-N-Out. I think that's brilliant.
Yeah.
I mean, how can they not prosper?
That's why no matter what In-N-Out you go to, the burger tastes the same. It's the same quality. They have the standards. What is it? SOPs? Standard operating procedures. The fries taste the same. You know, it's consistent. Same with, you could say the same with Starbucks.
And they only have one simple menu. You know?
Oh, yeah.
It's not like you can order enchiladas and burritos and, you know what I mean?
No, the menu is like three things.
Yeah. And I know they've gone a little creative, you know, but I don't even know some of the ones, because it's not on the menu.
Right.
You need to really...
Secret menu.
Whatever it is. And so, I mean, it's brilliant. It's brilliant. But this law, I love it, because it took me all over the place. I had to read all
Yeah.
kinds of
Now
things.
this is one that I try to live by, definitely.
Sounds good to me, man.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.